I'm Scott Belck from Lip Slur World Headquarters and the University of Cincinnati College-Conservatory of Music. I hope you'll join me on the Other Side of the Bell podcast.
Hello, and welcome to The Other Side of the Bell, a podcast dedicated to everything trumpet, brought to you by Bob Reeves Brass. We'll help you take your trumpet playing to the next level. I'm John Snell, trumpet specialist here at Bob Reeves Brass, and I'll be your host for this episode. Joining me today is trumpeter and CEO of Lip Slur Headquarters, Scott Belck. Scott serves as the Director of Jazz Studies and Professor of Music at the University of Cincinnati College-Conservatory of Music. Scott is a founding member of the contemporary trumpet ensemble Tromba Mundi and toured as lead trumpet with Grammy-winning Bootsy Collins's Funk Unity Band. Scott has performed as a lead trumpet and guest soloist with the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra with John Pizzarelli and the Manhattan Transfer. He's also toured with the Glenn Miller Orchestra and played with the UNT 1 O'Clock Lab Band. Scott has performed with the likes of Aretha Franklin, Doc Severinsen, the Four Freshmen, Neil Sedaka, and many, many others. And more recently, from the deepest, darkest corners of Lip Slur World Headquarters, Scott has taken over social media. And of course, we're talking about what has been dubbed America's favorite, most sarcastic lip slurs, his book, Progressive Lip Slurs for Brass. And for those of you who've done them, you know what I'm talking about. And we'll, of course, talk about that book here in this interview. I have a love-hate relationship with Scott's book. We'll get to Scott's interview here in a moment after a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Bob Reeves Brass, who share your passion for creating extraordinary music. You know that feeling when your instrument just clicks and the music flows effortlessly? That's what Bob Reeves Brass has been helping customers do since 1968. We've helped brass musicians like you achieve their dreams by ensuring their equipment is always in perfect harmony. We know you want to immerse yourself in the art of music making, and we're here to remove any barriers between you and your creative vision. Bob Reeves Brass is truly your one-stop shop for everything you need to fuel your passion and create music that touches hearts and souls. So go ahead, let us help you elevate your sound to new heights. Don't wait another moment to elevate your musical journey with Bob Reeves Brass. Connect with us at bobreeves.com, shoot us an email at info@bobreeves.com, and keep up with the latest news on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter at Bob Reeves Brass. Embrace your passion for music and let Bob Reeves Brass be your partner in creating the extraordinary. But without further ado, let's get right to my interview with Scott Belck. All right, we are here at ITG Anaheim, California, and I dragged out of Lip Slur Headquarters. Yes. Say that 20 times fast.
The Lip Slur bunker, yes.
The Lip Slur bunker, Scott Belck.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Other Side of the Bell.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I complained about it all the way up the elevator to people that I just met. But
and just 30 seconds ago.
Yes, right. Yeah,
we couldn't start the interview until you stopped complaining.
But I figured after 8 years, we should get together and do this. So
absolute honor to have you on here. And I'm just making your life difficult for the lip slurs that you've made me do and the difficulties I've had. So thank you. Well, we're almost even now.
I didn't write the book or any of that stuff to make me sound better. I wrote it to make you sound worse. So mission accomplished.
we're not gonna get through this.
Okay.
Let's start from the beginning.
Right.
How did the trumpet search you out, or did you find the trumpet?
Oh, no. I was a follower when I was young, and I walked out onto my front porch one day in 6th grade, and my best friend Jimmy Cutright was walking by, and I said, "Hey, Jimmy, where are you going?" He said, "Well, I'm going to go get a trumpet. I'm going to play in band." And I said, "That sounds like fun." And so on the spot, I turned around. My mom was sitting inside. I said, "Mom, I want to get a trumpet, and I want to play in band." And she worked at the local radio station, one of the 2 local radio stations, and she said, and one of her accounts, she was in sales, was one of the music stores. So she said, "Okay, I can make a call, and I think I can get you a trumpet, but it's not like the piano. You're going to have to practice."
Really?
So I'm like, okay, well, I didn't catch that, but it came with 5 free lessons. And so there was some students at the local university that were, those were my first teachers. So
Sixth grade.
Sixth grade.
So it just, your friend had it, and then boom.
Yeah.
Was it kind of an instant attraction, or was it just like, oh, I'm doing this in school, I'm having fun with
Well,
music?
I mean, he went and got a con, and I got a Bundy on the same day. We walked downtown, and then we went back to up to my bedroom and made race car sounds. That was about as as far as I got for the next 6 or 7 years, I guess, and then
race car sounds.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was like, we didn't know what it was. I don't know. It was just complete, like a total whim, and just and then at a certain point when I was into running and competitive running, distance running, when I was in like junior high, and I came home after a big kind of a national meet that I'd done pretty well at, and then my dad said to me, "It's time for you to start thinking about." I was 14. What you might want to do for your life, and he said it should meet a couple of different criteria. One, it should be something you're good at without trying, so you don't have to work your butt off to be mediocre. I said, "Good job, Dad." And then he said it should be something you find interesting, because it doesn't matter how much money you make. Yeah. If you don't like the thing you're doing, you're not going to be happy. And he didn't ever remember telling me this, and late when I told him about this later, and so I said, well, what am I going to be, a track coach? Yeah. That's not going to work. So try, and then so I basically went into music because I thought this seems easy enough.
Making the race car noises, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, right. I was
14.
I was dumb enough to think that it would be easy to be in music
at 14.
So yeah.
You had this conversation with your dad, and that was that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't have any other options. I was going to either be a writer. My family was in journalism and writing and editing and stuff, or something else. So
just music.
Yeah.
On a whim.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. Complete follower. I did. I was on the track team, which I did pretty well at, because I was following somebody else. Like the friends that I hung out with. None of that stuff ever occurred to me when I was younger. I just did what everybody else was doing. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So did that take you all the way to college? Just
yeah, and the only college I applied to was the local university. I was from West Virginia, Morgantown, and it never occurred to me that I could get in anywhere else. So I went to WVU, and I studied with the teacher I had in high school, and did that for a couple of years.
Who was that?
That was John Winkler, who was a Chickowitz student. He had come over from Northwestern, and so in 1982, I was getting Chickowitz studies. So I've literally been playing that stuff for how long that is.
That's a long.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, flow studies and all of that.
Yeah.
So your basis was then kind of out of the Chicago school then.
Absolutely. He was a fantastic musician.
Yeah.
Perfect pitch, and so he would sing the things from across Charlie A Etude across the room, and I'd start to play it, and he would have been perfect pitch, and it was very disorienting because I did not have perfect pitch. I only have good relative pitch, like on Wednesdays and weekends occasionally.
Well, it's only book gigs those days.
Yeah.
That's so famous Bob Reeves line. Guy complained, I can't get through my 4-hour gigs. And he said, well, only book 3-hour gigs.
There it is.
Yeah.
That just stands to reason.
Yeah, exactly. So are you doing the Chicago school stuff? I mean, were you going kind of a classical route? Did you have kind of any aspirations to do...
Oh yeah, I love playing jazz and listening to it. Back in the 80s, there wasn't much access to recordings where I was. I went to the library. I found a Louis Armstrong record. I checked it out. I just never took it back. I paid the fine or whatever it was. And then I would go to the National Record Mart, which was a chain, and they would have jazz, and I would just look for something with a trumpet on it. And if it had a trumpet on the front, I would just get it. And then my mother actually said, like I said, it was in radio, so that. They went to a FM top 40 format, and she brought home crates of records, promotional records from and that was Al Hurt and Maynard Ferguson and Miles Davis, and you just name it. And that's where I just found those records that were at home and started listening to them.
So you're just absorbing all of that. So you were leaning to the jazz side.
Well, there wasn't any. I didn't have live trumpet, like jazz trumpet players in my hometown. I had to drive to Pittsburgh to hear Wynton play in 1984 at Heinz Hall, but it really wasn't a lot of opportunity. We had 6 weeks of stage band in high school, and at a given year. And so there was no curriculum. There was no way to study jazz at that point. People couldn't even decide what to call a half diminished chord in those days. It was like the Stone Ages of. But anyway, my father and stepmother were at the University of Tennessee. She was a department chair, actually a dean, and Jerry Coker was teaching there. And I ended up transferring down there and became a jazz major. And well, they didn't. It was a concentration in studio music and jazz. My teacher was Kathy Leach, so and I was probably her worst student. So I wish I were exaggerating.
Well, I appreciate your honesty, but that's inspiring. That, where you've come. So so take us through that. You just.
Oh, I like to go to parties. It was a lot of fun. I loved Tennessee, and then I hung out, and I wanted to do the jazz thing without doing the practicing thing. So I would hang out at the local jazz club and sit in, but they never booked me, But the owner liked me because I was always there. And so I tell people, I actually got an alumni award from the University of Tennessee a couple of years ago. And I went back and they had asked me to speak, and I said it's a good thing that this is an alumni award because I wasn't winning any student awards while I was here. And so I got really, really serious about practicing in 1990. So I graduated from Tennessee in 1989.
So you got through school.
Yeah, I got through school.
You got through school, and then it hit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was like the only jazz trumpet major where I was. I was a small fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
And so I figured out that I needed a little bit more of a robust environment. So I ended up going to Indiana University for a minute to start my master's degree. This was in 1991, and I ended up playing with Steve Patrick in Dominic Sparrow's band. I got to meet Steve then, and great trumpet players like Steve Wiseman, Steve Roach. It was like a real culture of practicing that was going on in those days at IU, and that was exactly what I needed. So I jumped in. That was where I started getting up in the morning and getting to school when the building opened, and I got into practicing really hardcore. But a lot of my younger years, I really wasn't. But
so it was being with those guys that got you.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing other people doing it.
Yeah,
and wanting to understanding. Okay, and then like Steve is a great example because he came back from Disney, and I'd never heard anybody play like that. He'd roll out of bed and play B flats, Bs, C sharps, Ds, up to double F, F above double C, and but he didn't have a double C. It was pretty funny. I really enjoyed that part. And he hated it. So I don't
that
know,
was his break, huh?
Yeah. It had a force field around it. So, but yeah, I mean, so that was where I started to realize I could get up in the morning and get out of bed and start to do things. And so that carried me through since about that time. I just made myself become a morning person because that was when I could get a practice room.
So what did your practicing look like then? I mean, were you relying on the Chickowitz stuff still, or did that change at all?
What ended up happening is so right around 1990, the Bill Adams culture was in the air in the Midwest in Cincinnati, and not everybody was into it. So what ended up happening is I took a couple lessons with Mr. Adam, and I got into the idea of the routine. So I ended up doing like 2 or 3 or 4 hours of Schlossberg or whatever. Now, so I overdid it. If some is good, you must do more, right? You know, and so I actually kind of overdid it on that for a number of years. Got kind of stiff, and it felt like if I don't get 3 hours or 4 hours of this practicing, and I'm not going to be able to play. And then I started getting more professional work, and then wound up in Denton. After I was on the road with the Miller Band for about a year, I did cruise ships, and then I went to North Texas, which again was another step up for like the environment of people who were dedicated, and I saw that model, and it drove me to be want to be better, and I realized I have to figure out how to make this easier. I was really, I didn't find it. I felt like it was a lot of us struggle to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do. You know, I still do.
Yeah. So, and I kind of, and not to skip ahead, but
Yeah.
now in your role as a professor and
Yep.
teaching a lot of students, you know, looking back at your own career, like what advice would you give in terms of choosing a music school or a conservatory, things like that?
Well, I mean, you know, giving advice to younger people is, you know, there's too much advice, you know?
Yeah.
So you've got to figure out how to make good decisions in general. And choosing a music school or choosing an environment to be in is part of that process, is understanding what you really need out of it. I think one of the main considerations that I counsel my younger, you know, my undergraduates who are going on to graduate school or recruits, is to make sure that to the best degree possible that you're not going into a situation to get a music degree that you're going to be in debt for. And that's it's easier said than done. But like I tell my students, if you're going to go to grad school, don't pay for it. You should have an assistantship or a full ride. And if there's a place you want to go and they don't have that for you, then either you're not ready to go there yet. Sometimes it's a timing issue, and sometimes it's you, if that might be the place for you, but not yet. So find a way to take away the post-graduation pressures of the financial pressures, so that you can afford to be poor. You know, so that I'm very careful about recruiting students from out of state. That where the out of state tuition for a lot of schools, mine including the University of Cincinnati, is very high, and so I'm at a distance with that. I want to make sure I'm not putting my potential graduates into that situation as much as possible. Yeah. So that's the number one thing. You know, some people are going to want to gravitate towards an environment. Some are going to want to gravitate towards a great teacher. I studied with Vince DiMartino for many years, but I did it on the side. I was in the Air Force, and I got support to go down and see him. So for years, I would go down and see Vince, and we would do all the things that I would have done if I had gone to school there. But, you know, so there are great teachers that you can study with, and other ways to study that, you know, you can supplement that don't involve going to school with that particular person. And a lot of the premier or name prestige schools, the students are studying with professors who aren't around very much. You know, so like my school, I'm saying, you know, if you come here, you know, it's just me, but I'll be here. Yeah, I'm gonna be around. I'll be here. You can knock on my door. I will literally be in town. You know, if you want to take a lesson. You know, we're gonna have a lesson next week.
Yeah,
you know,
well, but there's something to that. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, you can can study with people without having to go through the college program, or maybe the music department at the school that the teacher you like, you don't really fit with the department. And you got to find it free. And you know, and the conversation is really about your family at this point. It's not like just, well, what teacher do I like? Well, Mom, I want to go to this school. It's like, I want a lot of things. Yeah, you know, but it's like it's got to make sense. Yeah, and the landscape has changed so much over the years in terms of cost, and you know, it's like that's like huge. That's like the number one consideration. Yeah, that you're making a smart life decision that supplements your career goals. Yeah, you know, and also with the reality that when you do graduate, you're not going to be jumping into a 6-figure job, most likely. You know, like as if you were getting a computer engineering or computer science degree or a law degree or something, you know. Yeah, a lot of careers in music, if you're looking at it, it's very difficult to find a career that's centered around your performance that's going to pay all your bills. So the question is, what are you going to do to support your playing habit? I think of it like that way. And how closely is that going to be related to playing? For some people it's teaching, for other people that's the last thing they want to do. They hate it, or they don't like the idea. You know, my wife is that way. She was a French horn player, and a couple places where I taught, they wanted to hire her as the French horn professor. She did some of that, and she's like, I don't want to do this. And I was like, why not? She's like, I see what you do every day to go out to earn tenure. So I had to travel all over the world, submit articles, do reviews, do all this different, you know, jump through a lot of hoops, which I found interesting, but she did not. Yeah. You know, so the idea for my goal for my students is long term. When you're 40, is music and playing an important and rewarding part of your life? And is it sustainable to get through? You can do whatever until you're 30, but when life creeps in
and now all of a sudden you're maybe 35 or 40, and you've got all the things that go along with that in terms of family and commitments. Can music still be there as the main driver or one of the main drivers for fulfillment? Because it's no matter what you do, and I'll go back to what my dad said. It's got to be interesting. I want to have an interesting life. I want to have an interesting daily life. I want to see what I do as just something that's interesting to me, maybe not to everybody else. And so if you do a day job, or if you do a different kind of career, that's not a deal breaker. What are you doing to keep your soul alive and your intellect and your mind?
Yeah,
it's huge.
Yeah,
you know?
we skip out on the fulfillment part. You know. Yeah.
You know?
So
and at a certain point, I'm at the point in my life where I as a young, I got great advice. Don't turn any gig down, right? I took every gig that I could for many years. I got to a point where at one point, I remember this very well. I was in Dayton, and I was working 30 nights in a row. All right, and I was a full-time student. I was working on my master's recital. I was playing in the 1 o'clock lab band. I had 15 cornet students at a middle school in Fort Worth. And I was happy as, I loved it. And I got a call, and this is the day we had to physically answer the phone.
Yeah.
And I had one night off, and then I had another 2 weeks of work. And I got a call, and they said, "Hey, are you available on that?" And I knew immediately that I was available. I said, "I'm gonna have to call you back." Yeah. And so I hung up the phone, and I just remember the feeling, because it was the first gig that I ever turned down that I could have done.
Interesting.
All right.
Yeah.
And I knew as a family, it wasn't going to work for me to work 6 weeks in a row. So I called back and turned the gig down. Didn't save the marriage. But it was, I was a start. I tipped the cap to the institution, I guess.
It was a good start.
Yeah. Right.
But that's the thing. And that's the thing that, especially freelance life, or, things you have to do to make a career performing, that I go guys here in LA that will never take a day off, or they won't go out of town just in case someone needs a sub on the day they're out of town. And some people love that. They love that life, and that's fine. That's the job for them.
I remember when my son was about 2 years old, and I was going out to do a job that I wasn't looking forward to. It was like a Friday night, and it was dark, and it was starting to snow. And I remember looking into the house, and it looked like warm and inviting, and I thought, I don't want to. God, that's not what I want to do. I want to figure out how to put myself in a position that if I'm not going out simply to go out and use music to be an instrument just to make money. It's I want to be able to figure out how to have family time and physically be around. We don't believe in quality time. It's quantity time as far as children are concerned. It's just physically be there. Yeah. And I saw a lot of my peers and colleagues and mentors who did not do that, and I saw the results of that. What it does to your family, and so just make that a priority. And that's what happens.
But you still manage to play a lot.
And
with a lot of folks.
So
I'd like to talk a little bit about that. You'd mentioned so when you were at I'm going back, if it was at IU or when you UNT, when you started doing like Glenn Miller and started
in between those. So I went out and did ships. I was broke. I dropped out of IU. I was I had no money. I went out on ships for about a year. And then I made a tape. We were at a band was from Indiana, really good players, and we made an original tape in San Juan. We went to a studio in San Juan, Puerto Rico on our day off, and we recorded all day. I took that cassette and I sent it to the Miller Band, and then I sent it to North Texas, and then I forgot about both of them. And then I got off my last contract, and then the Miller Band called me, and I got hired. And then I was on the Miller Band for about a month or two, and then I called home, and then my mom said, a guy from North Texas just called and wanted to know why you didn't accept your scholarship. Didn't know I had one, because I was on the road. I didn't have an address. I literally didn't have an address to, and so I wrote a letter to the head of the program at North Texas. I said, I'm on the road. Would you hold my scholarship for me because I'm going to go for the next year? And he wrote back and said, yeah, sure. And so that I got off the band in LA. The last time I was at LAX, actually, except for this, this week.
Really?
And we flew in from Tokyo. I got on another flight to Dallas, and then I went up to grad school. So,
Jeez.
but the Miller Band was an interesting experience because you're ambivalent about that type of a job when you're doing it. The people that are on the band, most of them aren't listening to Glenn Miller music, and I was a pretty poor reader when I got on the band. I had played cruise ships, but I was not ready for this. And for the first couple of weeks, I thought I was going to get fired. There were no rehearsals. And the book was like this thick. So I didn't know about releases. Like when the note ends and everybody stops playing that note together, except for the third trumpet, right? Okay, and you're like, and so so all of my whole notes lasted about 2 beats with a decrescendo. So I didn't, as a cope, like this. So I didn't realize it. But that was actually one of the tightest bands going because we were mainly sober compared to a lot of the other road bands in those days. And we played really, really precise, music. And so when I got to school at North Texas, which was a sight reading culture, I was able to kind of come in near the top of the food chain just because of the chops I had developed. Even though the gig itself wasn't to me the most musical, it wasn't music that I loved. But it prepared me to do the things that I needed to do, and it really, without me realizing it, I became a good reader, and I didn't, I was like, oh, I guess I'm a good reader now. It was like there was no celebration. It was just like, oh, I could do it.
Learning on the job.
Yeah,
and also probably going to graduate school, having worked for a year on the cruise ships or in the
made a big difference.
You have some context now that to your learning.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is that when we talk about like graduate school, when I talk to students about going to graduate school, a lot of students they'll go right into their master's degree with no break, and they'll get burned out, or they're just like, because they've been in school for 20 years or basically. But if you are able to take the narrative, it used to be, and it still is well, if you take time between your degrees, you're much less likely to go back, right? If you want to go to graduate school, you need to think about the big picture of that. And then, so what I tell my students is like to make sure, or anybody that'll listen for that matter, like you right now, unfortunately, is a lot of people think about graduate school from what they're going to get. And what I like to tell my students is that you should think about graduate school to what you bring to it. All right. So having spent professional time on the outside made me more valuable as a graduate assistant, made me more valuable as a person contributing to the department that I was entering into. I wasn't just a player; I was a professional, and I had other like soft skills, things of how to get along with people. Those sort of things that you don't really even think about. Everyone's thinking about playing. So when I have a graduate assistant come, I have graduate assistants that are in my department, and I'm the one that kind of does the screening for that. I'm looking at people that have life experience, that have done organizational types of things, administrative things to help out. So those soft skills and those related career skills are going to be developed when you're not in school. In my opinion. And that's what you're getting when you come into a program. And then you're going to get more out of it because you're going to have a better idea what you want to get out of it because you've got time to ruminate on it. Yeah.
Fascinating. And you brought that to UNT.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
and like I was doing all that stuff, and then one of their graduate assistants bailed at the last minute, so I got to be the jazz theory teaching fellow, and Dan Hurley was the teacher, and he would hand me 120 papers and say, I need these by Thursday. And I was like, Dan, it's Tuesday, and I got 2 gigs. So but that it's absolutely, you're going to think about big picture. A lot of in my field, which is academe, I've been a chair. I've chaired like 7 searches since I've been at the school that I teach at. And, there are all the things that everybody does that are on your resume or on your CV. And what we're looking at often is, what are the things that distinguish you? Everybody does this. Everyone has a DMA. Everybody has experience playing. What makes you stand out? How are you identified? And in other words, it's a chance to, in a good way, like sort of pigeonhole yourself. Be associated. Oh, you're the guy that does this, or she's the one that is the expert in this. And so you're looking at career development from a like a lot of people think of their resume or their CV as just what they've done, okay? But a CV is a living document. In other words, when you look at your own CV, you can see what's missing. And you need to go, oh, I don't have much of this. What do I need to do to create that missing element of my experience and my skills? And then you develop that, or what am I an expert in? What am I interested in? So I taught a class at the university called the Academic Job Search, and it was about career development. And folks they look at very narrowly whatever it is they think that they're going to bring to the table. And you want to think, what distinguishes you? What do you do differently? And what do you know, that's a big deal. For me, it's of course lip slurs. Everybody wants lip slurs, and that's the thing.
Yeah, you've made a name in the trumpet brass world with your lip slurs.
Whatever.
We'll get to those.
No, that's all right.
We'll get to those. So going back to your playing, how did your freelance career develop after? I mean, you were freelancing at UNT, I'm assuming, like a lot of guys do, and then.
Well, and since I was in the lab band, the 1 o'clock there, I could read now, so I could do whatever it was. I could answer my phone and say, yeah, I can do that. And I got to the point where I went out and played a gig, sight read a gig on lead trumpet for a society band or something like that. I remember leaving the gig, and I just like the whole night I hadn't misread anything. And I didn't know I had that skill set. And I was like, and it doesn't mean I didn't chip a note or anything like that, but it meant like I was in that, I was ready to come out here or go to Nashville or do something like that if that had been my interest. And so that kind of freelance, I was playing in a party band, corporate like dance wedding band, led by a really great front man named Bill Tillman, who had played with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And it was like, we worked like crazy. So I did a lot of pop, a lot of Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago, and, all the things that you do back in the 90s. And then I went into the Air Force.
Just like that.
Well,
I'm going to play spinning wheel and then join the Air Force.
Well, no, a buddy of mine from school got into a field band in Dayton, Ohio.
So you're following again?
Yeah, again. Well, he called me and he said, "Hey, we need a jazz trumpet player." I wasn't doing a lot of lead playing. I wasn't a lead player at this point. I was around a lot of really good lead players, and I thought, I need to figure this out. I don't know how to do it. And he said, "We need somebody in our field band. We need a jazz player." And I was like, "Well, I'm not driving to Dayton, Ohio to audition." This was the old days. They could do a one-off audition. So he said, we're going to be in Oklahoma City at Tinker Air Force Base. Why don't you come up and just play for us? And I was like, oh, all right, And so I went up there, and they sent me this giant packet, and I was like, I can't do all this, And so I said, they're like, well, we really need somebody. They were desperate. They said, what can you do? I said, well, I could do like half of it, And they're all right, they're fine, So I went up and I auditioned in the base hotel, and there were like 10 people sitting around in camouflage, like on the floor, and and I'm like playing Festive Overture, and then they offered me the gig there, on the spot, and I thought I was going to go teach, but I wasn't qualified yet. I had a master's, or was about to, but that wasn't getting me anywhere yet. So they offered me the gig, and I ended up accepting it. My wife was like, wanted to get out of Texas, and she wanted to go back to school. And so this was and then right then, the club that this party band was playing at closed, or one of them. And then a bunch of the guys in the band had truck payments and, had rent, and they were really hurting.
Yeah.
And like I said, this was one of the workingest bands in Dallas at the time, and they were in trouble because it was too late to fill those dates. So I was like, we probably need to go. And so I took that gig, and I knew I wanted to get a doctorate, so I knew I was going to get GI Bill. So, and I knew I loved being in Cincinnati because I'd lived there before, or in Ohio because I'd lived here before. And I thought, well, I'm going to be right there near CCM, which is, an hour and a half away from where I was living, and I can start working on my doctorate, which I did while I was still in the Air Force.
Really?
Yeah.
They let you do that?
Yeah.
Or
Well, we would have like summer leave, and I would enroll in summer classes. And they were condensed in those days, and so I would come down and take lessons and do the things while everyone else is on vacation. I started grad school.
Yeah.
And so when I stepped out of grad school, or out of the Air Force in '99, I went straight to be a graduate assistant on GI Bill, and so that was the richest I've ever been because I had $1,200 in the bank before I played a gig or did anything, and school was free, 100% free. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
And then talk us through the military. What was it like playing in the band, and was it?
Well, it was interesting. I ran into so many great players. There were a bunch of people that I just love to this day. And there were days where I thought I could do this for 20 years. That usually I was on the golf course at 2 in the afternoon going, yeah, I could do this for 20 years. Not usually. That's when I said that. That wasn't. But any of those bands, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, no matter how good they are, they're going to drive you insane eventually if you don't have if you're a creative person and don't have creative outlet. So I used the stability of that band to start my own things on the outside. Started a reading band on Thursday nights at a jazz club. Ended up, creating sort of my own thing because I had steady income, and it used that infrastructure to help propel me forward. I didn't really realize I was doing it to the degree I was doing it at the time. I was just doing it because I was bored. And then, but by the time I got out of the Air Force, I had that year I had 3 bands working on New Year's, and I did I did one of them, and I had so I contracted out the other stuff. And I thought, I'm pretty good at this. I need to get out of it because I don't want to do this, So it was like, yeah, I could do that. And I figured out how to do it, and I was good at it. And I was immediately knew that I need to stop.
Well, that's one of my previous podcasts. Someone, I forgot who it was, said it's just as important to figure out what you don't want to do as it is what you actually want to do, you know? And I'm just your career is so fascinating with the twists and turns through your schools and then the military. But your goal, all of this, was still to DMA and get a teaching position. So.
Yeah, and that was I told you my stepmother was in academe. She was a department chair and then a dean at a bigger school and then a provost and then a president and then a chancellor. So I grew up around that whole thing, sitting there meeting. Folks that were in the business, and I thought that I eventually I didn't mention that, but by the time I was in college, I was like, this is what I want to do, and the main reason I wanted to do it was because of the kind of daily life that you have being a professor, and the idea that not only do you have you have some control over it, you have some autonomy. You don't have somebody managing you, micromanaging you, and if you have a creative project, you can go do it. So for instance. In my line of work, I have to go off campus every semester to go be creative and to bring stuff back to my students. And that's part of the job, to professional development, to be more interesting and be a better teacher. So I saw that early on as a career path that I knew I wanted to do. So it was very easy for me to keep my eye on that prize. Everything I did was to try to help me support that. It's a great gig. I mean, it's a great life. I love it.
Yeah, but then you also have a very successful freelance career alongside of that, playing with top artists that we all love and enjoy. And I saw on your Bootsy Collins, you played with Bootsy Collins.
Bootsy lives in Cincinnati. And so a friend of mine, now when this happened, I mean, I was in my 40s, in my early 40s at this point, and a friend of mine was his saxophone player. And he called me up and he said, would you like to do some touring with Bootsy? And I'm like, yes. But I'm an administrator. I'm the department chair. And so and I literally was department chair for 2 different departments at this time. And I wasn't playing a lot. I was not gigging as much. And so I said, do me a favor, because he's going to want you to come play with the band and we'll have an audition. And I said, just do me a favor, give me a heads up a couple weeks out so I can get into shape, so I can do, because I was kind of hedging my bet. So he called, or actually one of Bootsy's people called, and said, "Hey, we're looking forward to hearing you on Friday." This was Wednesday.
That was your advance notice.
So come out and play with the band, and you just read. The band didn't work from charts, so my friend, a wonderful saxophone player, but not a very good music copyist, he created parts for me out of Pro Tools. Okay, so we went into Pro Tools and sort of sequenced in the parts and then pressed print.
Oh my gosh.
And it was basically, if you could imagine a page of 16th note rests with notes sprinkled in between, and it was just terrible. So I went out to Bootsy's house, and he's got a studio, and there was nobody there. The band was not there. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, oh yeah, they were out real late last night, so they're not going to be here. So it's just going to be you and me and the musical director who played rhythm guitar. I'm like, okay, all right. So this is a great story, actually. So he said, we're just going to play the show down. And I'm like, so he hands me this Bootsy's show, and I wish I had a copy of it. I can't describe to you what this looked like, but it was, I mean, literally, like, it was like each beat had at least 2 16th note rests in it. Because it was quantizing it. So he'd play a quarter note, but it would show up as a 16th note and then three individual 16th note rest. So we start playing it, and the rhythm guitar he starts playing. He's great. He's fantastic. And we just start playing. He's like, okay, and of course he didn't put any repeats in, and it was full of errors. So it's like, okay, now vamp on that measure. So we're playing the thing, and he's like, no, play the bottom note. He's playing bottom note B, bottom note C, bottom note B. So I'm like, I have to. So like he's calling out the changes, the fixes while we're vamping and telling me what to do on this thing. And I got through with it, and then we probably played the first 15 minutes of the show, and then he's like, yeah, all right, man, you're in. We really like the way you played. I'm like, all right. You've got we'll call you with the gigs, and then and there was another wonderful trumpet player from out here on the West Coast, Farnell Newton.
Oh yeah.
And so he was doing the West Coast stuff, and I was doing the sort of Midwest and East Coast stuff for a little while. And but I mean, like I said, I'm like a department chair. 45-year-old, a bad back, and it's just like the bus is leaving from the Red Roof Inn at midnight, and I'm like, oh, this is not going to work. So it was at the same time, it was like simultaneously like one of the coolest gigs I've ever done in my life, and also one of the worst gigs I've ever done in my life because of the timing and just the way where I was in my life, So a lot of the things that sound really, really sexy, there's very little glamour in it,
but it builds character.
Yeah, it was too late for that.
Yeah, well, but like you said, I mean, that gives experiences that you can then bring back to your students. And,
I mean, like we got on the bus, and it was one of those sleeper buses. So they've got these berths that look like sort of like crypts. So you're going to spend the next, 18 hours with your iPad on your stomach like this, with like this. And so I got on the bus, and I just remember going, okay, there's 15 people on the bus, and there are 12 of those. I'm getting in one now. It's like just rudimentary math that you have to do is like, oh no, I'm 45 years old. I'm getting in one of these. I don't care. You kids can, do the thing. But at the same time, I'm, the stories that you hear from the early days of, just getting, playing with James Brown or Parliament Funkadelic and the crazy stories that they had. I've got good stories. I thought I had good stories, but I'm like, Division III minor league stories, Remember that time the pig was running around the gate? There's around the the stage. Is like, no, their stuff is epic.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you being in Ohio, a lot of acts come through, and then you get picked up and play the local shows.
Over the years, I did. I used to do some of the Broadway stuff. When I was living in Columbus, I did all the touring Broadway stuff for a few years. In Cincinnati, there's a group of people that do that work and have been doing that same work for 30 years. And so I don't get that call, but simultaneously it's not something that I enjoy doing. So I'm not like sitting around going, I wish they'd call, and that's part of the thing, like I was saying, like the circumstances of your, of your city really dictate a lot of your opportunities, not because of your ability, but because of who was there first. Contractors want to call the people they're used to. It doesn't matter that if you think you're better than that person, it has nothing to do with that. It's like they don't want to worry about that, And the other thing is the inconvenience. I was saying like that, the thing with the opportunities, like when Bootsy called, or when they called for me to audition, it was at the worst possible time. So getting in your mind that they're going to call you to do that really cool thing or the thing that you want to do, it's not going to be like when you have like a stretch where it's going to work out perfectly. It's going to be like right in the worst possible time. Oh, my wife is expecting.
Yeah.
The coolest gig you get is your call is going to be like, oh yeah, she's due the week after that, or whatever. So there's a fair degree of inconvenience and randomness in a lot of that type of work, and so you realize that consistency you have to be ready, through that entire kind of process,
Yeah, great advice. Let's talk about lip slurs.
Oh, my, yeah.
Went
home for me.
When did you wake up in the morning and say the trumpet world needed more lip slurs?
It's an interesting question because there's actually an answer. It wasn't that exact question.
Okay.
But I thought of the concepts, the stuff that's in my book. I mean, you know what it is. It's fairly novel, and it's I've got a lot of feedback from it that it's novel and kind of interesting, and perhaps useful. All right. So I thought about the basic concepts in the late 80s.
Wow, goes that far back?
When I was listening to Michael Brecker, the saxophonist, and Woody Shaw, and I said to one of my mentors or teachers, Pat Harbison, he remembers this conversation. So wouldn't it be cool if somebody could figure out a way to use alternate fingerings on the trumpet in a way that was functional? In other words, that wasn't an effect. So if you think there's a famous solo by Lee Morgan on Sidewinder, and he does alternate fingering, and he goes, and it's almost like a percussion effect. It's really super cool. It's like one of the great moments in jazz trumpet history, but it's not a harmonic thing. It's just a cool thing.
Yeah.
And so I thought of that, and then I just forgot about it for 25 years. Literally it was 2012. Jeez. And it was summertime, and I'm sitting around on my back deck, and I've got my practice mute in and my laptop open, and I came up with a little lip slur, nothing interesting, nothing, and I put it into Sibelius because I was right there, and I did a screenshot, and I loaded it into Facebook, and I tagged my students, and none of them even looked at it. I got 6 people to like it, I think. I didn't care. I was just like, I don't know, I'll do this, and I would play that. So I did this for a couple of days, did the same thing. And then on the second, maybe the third day or fourth day, I was just improvising, and I came up with one of these exercises out of the blue, and it was intact. And I realized this is different. This is a different thing. It's in the first book. It's called Orbicularis Redemptor. And I was like, this is good. I was just like, okay. So I put it into Sibelius. I did a little shtick, a screenshot. I uploaded it, and I said, "Greetings from Lip Slur World Headquarters in Cincinnati, Ohio." And the staff has been up all night working on, just some shtick, like. And then I uploaded it, and then I tagged like 50 trumpet players around the world, like Vince and Byron Stripling is someone I've worked with forever. And my old teachers, Philip McCann, the cornet player in Britain.
Oh yeah.
And I just did it on a whim, on a lark, because you could just tag people and so it was a exercise, the first part of it, and I got like 200 likes and like over 200 comments, and I was like, ooh. I think I'm on to something. I've got an audience, because people were like, "What? This is cool. How do I download the rest of it?" No, there is no more, And then so I started posting these exercises, every other week because it was summer. I started getting all these people, like the Second Horn and the Tuscany Symphony from Italy is like friending me, like, "Hey, this is cool."
Yeah.
And guys from the Concertgebouw Orchestra, just like all over the world, so that viral aspect of people playing it, and I started getting feedback from people I knew that, hey, this is cool. And then as I did it, some small publishers contacted me, said, "Why are you giving this stuff away? We'll publish it for you." And I was like, "Well, I'm not sure what I want to do, if I want to self-publish it." And then I went through the whole fall doing this, and people got to know me through this. And then a friend of mine who worked at a place called Stanton's Sheet Music in Columbus said, "Hey, he's a trumpet player. He said, I got to get with my guys at Hal Leonard." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, "People have been pitching me books for years." He said, "Your stuff is different than all of that, and I think they would like it." And I said, "Well, what makes you think this all of a sudden?" He said, "I wasn't pitching it to him." And he said his son-in-law was in the Langley Band in the Air Force in D.C. or outside of D.C. And when his son-in-law came home for Christmas, my friend said, "Let me show you these exercises that I was putting together."
Yeah.
And he showed it to him, and he said, "Oh, all the cats in the D.C. bands are doing these," right? And so then he hooked me up with Meredith, which was a subsidiary of Hal Leonard. They gave me a contract, and then almost exactly a year from the day I did that first lip slur, it came online, and I got worldwide distribution. So it was pretty cool, it happened very quickly. The second book took another 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just from that
one
idea 25 years before, and then coming up with, and then it just came to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea...
And then your marketing genius with your wit and your sense of humor, it all came together.
Yeah, let's have some fun with it. You know, like, and the idea behind the material isn't that this is an exercise, but this is some kind of, it's like a piece of music that you would like to play, that there's some logic to it. And the thing about it is there's an intuitive thing. The stuff that I've written and I try to write, it feels right, or it has a feel when you play it. It's native to the instrument. And I think a lot of times what you'll see in exercise books is you'll see visually, you'll see things that go up and then come back down, and I go up and then come back down. And I wanted to think, well, how do I actually learn? And we're all programmed as trumpet players to be like Clark, like 4 bars repeated.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so smaller amounts of material that has an idiomatic feel to it, but that also sounds kind of cool. It's hard enough that you can't play it, but there's a logic to it that makes you think maybe I can.
Yeah.
So whenever I write the things, I'm playing them and I'm thinking, okay, here's the pattern, here's the logic, here's, and then how do I break the logic so you have to pay attention? All right. Okay. So you can't,
I hate you, Scott.
So you can't.
You get me every time at that moment too.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing. It's like at a certain point you set up an expectation and then you kick the legs out from under it.
Yeah.
So that you're not allowed to. Whoever's playing it, you can't get in too much of a automatic pilot because there's going to be a change, and there are different ways of doing that compositionally. And I started thinking about the material, which is fairly straightforward, the basic concepts. But looking at it like, what can I do to connect these things, or to layer them, or to embellish them? And they're straight ahead compositional. So they're compositions in a different way than but they're short and they're
So bite-sized morsels.
Sure.
I say I open the page, I get a little chuckle from the title. Before what's about to come out.
Sure, yeah.
When you sweep my legs.
Yeah, and so like in the passive aggressive abusive part of the commentary is some of the stuff that people like the most.
Yeah.
So when I was doing all those posts, I had friends that were saying, when you publish this book, you got to make sure you leave this stuff in. So Hal Leonard made me take out all the alcohol references.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's their
Makes sense,
I'm like, all right, So the second book, I self-published, so I got to put all the alcohol references.
And the other cool thing to see was, especially during the pandemic, when a lot of folks were just sitting around at home, I mean, the number of friends and colleagues and pro players and weekend warriors and you name it, doing challenges with your exercises or posting and stuff. And it's like, that's got to be pretty cool as an author to see your stuff. Just
what's really cool that is that I didn't anticipate ever writing a method book. Because seems like that a lot of stuff's been done, and so when I'm here at the conference, people that I wouldn't associate with normally. Like I got to meet I forgot his name, but he's the principal trumpet in Madrid. He just presented, and he came and introduced himself to me, and I'm like, he's like, I give your book to my students. I'm like, oh, great,
Yeah.
But so I'm meeting a lot of people now over the last 10 years, 12 years as an author, that people have connected to my material, and it's a different dynamic when I'm discussing them. I like to talk about playing. But it's like, I've got last year at the conference, I met a professor from somewhere on the Iberian Peninsula. And I gave him one of my books. I hit it off with him. He was, it was late night hang. I went and got a book and just gave it to him. And he was confused. And he goes, I said, "That's me. That's my book." He's like, "I know." He's like, "No, I'm that's my name. That's me. You can have it." And he's like, "This is you." And he was a little bit out of it. It was late. It was late at night.
Yeah.
And so he figured it out. And he goes, your book in Europe is famoso. It's famoso. I'm like, all right, cool. And he said, well, the PDF.
Not like a backhanded compliment.
I was like, okay, well, there's no PDF version of it that I sell. So so that you end up doing that, especially now that it's global. When we got material that's global, that there's a certain amount of it that's just going to be out there.
Yeah.
If I'm worried about my quote unquote brand, which I'm not, it's just as healthy to have copies floating around digitally in South America or whatever. I'm happy to have that happen.
People are learning from what you created,
and I do okay. And but it's rewarding in a way that I hadn't anticipated. To have people come up to me that I don't know that are really good at what they do, if they're teachers or players or whatever like that, and say, I had somebody call me He was playing like a big show player at Disney World. This was when the first book came out. I had met him, and somebody that you've heard of probably, and I didn't know him very well. I'd met him once, and he called me in my office. And it was like 5 o'clock on a Friday or whatever. I just happened to be there. He's like, "Hey, I got your book," and I was like, "Oh, no, thanks for calling." He's like, "You suck. I sound like shit. I can't play this stuff, And I was like, "You made me so happy." I just yes, mission accomplished. Yeah. So that's sort of like it's the kind of when you're giving your friends crap and when you're heckling each other in sometimes a good-natured way, but it's like that's the spirit of this, the angst. Yeah. We're going to share the suffering together. And so when I give a book to somebody or when they order it, if I talk to them, I say, I hope this brings you everything you truly deserve.
That's a great line. That's a great line. Let's talk about Donna Lee.
Oh, okay. All right. I love
So is that what made you decide to go through that in every key?
Well, I don't know. Do people? That's my routine. My practice. My first hour of every day. Is playing Donna Lee, and so it's a couple things. We make our students do it, right? We play our graduate students and our seniors have to play Donna Lee in all 12 keys for their board exams, and I love playing the tune, and I've spent a lot of time with it, but I realized that I was like, I need to probably learn it in all 12 keys. So this coincided with something else too. The year before I started at Cincinnati, Lee Konitz, the great jazz alto player, came and gave a master class at school. It was before I was there. I was a student. I went away for a long time. I came back as a teacher. And I found the master class, the recording, the audio recording of it. And so I was listening to it. I don't know. And Lee Konitz was talking to the kids. And he said, I like to start my day as an improviser. I want to, be in that space from the minute something along these lines. And he said, of course, I'm a saxophone player, but like the brass people, they have to do other stuff first, okay? And which you're like, obviously I've spent the last 45 years doing that other stuff first. And then he said, and this is what made me, he goes, well, I've always wondered about that. And so I thought, okay. Well, I told you, I got my Chickowitz studies in 82.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, what would it be like if I assumed when I start practicing that whatever I practice isn't going to ruin my trumpet playing if it's not Chickowitz, if that makes sense. So I could play a song like Donna Lee, first thing, I do some free buzzing, but then what would that look like? I want to learn it in all 12 keys. So I said, I'm going to 15 to 20 minutes a day, first thing, I'm going to practice. I'm going to go through the keys. And I made, I started doing it. And this was in 2020, the fall where we were on lockdown and very little in-person teaching at school, but some. And so I figured out what keys I was going to do. And I said, okay, I'll just do it for 15 or 20 minutes. Well, I'm a real early morning person. So at, very early, I'm down in my basement practicing this stuff. And I realized it was like 15, 20 minutes wasn't doing it. And it was normally like 45 minutes, an hour and a half, because I'm like a super slow learner. I am. It's whatever it takes me forever to learn things.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I can still reinforce good playing. So I went through October, November, and December. And then on January 1st, I said, I'm going to do this for real. And I put together a database, a spreadsheet. And I said, I'm going to practice one key for an hour a day for 2 weeks. And then I'll be done with all 12 keys at the end of June. Okay. At the end of June, I'd gone through all the keys, and I have created tracks in Band in the Box at different tempos and different keys and all this stuff. And at the end of June, still couldn't play it. And what I mean is, like, I could play it.
Yeah.
But I want it to be I want it to be easy. And when I mean easy, I don't mean easy on my face. I mean easy in my mind, to where I don't need 100% concentration to play it at 220 in D or in F sharp or in A flat or whatever key I'm playing it in. I want it to just be something I do, not an event. So I just kept doing it, and I came up with different ways of doing it. So like right now I have a 12-tone row laminated on both sides, and I start out in the morning wherever I am, I've got a Post-it note, one of those little tiny little Post-it notes that's next to the row, and I go, okay, I'm starting in A, and then and it goes, and I give it 5 minutes per key, with a 2-minute rest, and I go until the hour's out, and then like yesterday, because I'm at the conference, I didn't get to it, all of it, so I had 26 minutes left this morning, so I add that onto my hour today, so I had to do an hour and 26 minutes today. And the geometry of the song, the construction of the melody and the chords is such that you're learning the language of jazz, or a large part of it, in the way that lines can be made. So it's the transposition. Well, the thing that I do, I play it as low as possible. So I'm not burning a bunch of chops. So when I get to a chord tone, the third or whatever the chord, I will invert or pivot as low as I can in the chord. So 99% of all of this hour is going to be below C on the staff. All right. Maybe 95%. And then I might do 5 minutes up the octave. But I get done with doing it for an hour, I'm fresh.
You're good to go. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's my warm-up routine, it's my maintenance routine. And then what I do is I go do Chikowitz and Baggio and all the things that I would do, but I put that there first. I've been going about 3.5 years.
Amazing.
I've missed 17 days total. Wow. And those were usually intentional. I mean, it's like, I'm not going to do it tomorrow because I had a gig, or I'm just going to take tomorrow off for whatever reason. And I don't get weirded out by it if I have. I'm not like trying to a million days of practice, I don't have that, whatever, and just try to make it something I do. I had originally done this spreadsheet, which the Donna Lee part was just the first column, and I had all this other stuff that I was going to do, all the things you are in this key, stablemates, all this stuff. I just never got done. I never got out of the first thing, and it just became its own thing.
That's fascinating.
It's really, actually, it's a lot of fun. And it's I have to, every now and then, I just have to figure out a different way of getting into it and doing it, so it keeps it fresh. But right now, I will feel like I have it under my fingers when I can go at 240, 232 in any key. And I'm not that far away. I'm going to go at least 5 years with it. And when 5 years hits, I'm going to apply to present that here, or where, at the Trumpet Conference, which means they won't invite me. Right? Yeah. And I'm going to do it for the Jazz Conference too. So there's going to be, here's what happens of doing this, like being a human guinea pig on this, and using it in a way to build vocabulary, transposition, but also and it's completely changed the way I play the trumpet. It's completely changed.
I was going to say, that kind of leads into I was going to say, were there any kind of unintended effects, or benefits?
I bounced through big plateaus where it's just like, it's been 3 months and it's just the same thing. It's like doing Chikowitz or whatever. It's like, it's just something I do. And I've gone through, cycled through different horns and different setups, different mouthpieces, and different things that I'm trying to get out of it. And I had hit a pretty significant plateau with my tempos at the end of last year. And what I realized, I think this is kind of interesting. I played softly, very softly. So, and then I realized at the end of December, because I'm a slow learner after 3 years, this way of playing this is sustainable if I'm playing by myself. But if I actually had to play with a rhythm section, it would be inaudible. I would have to have a microphone. And so I can't do this in public. It's not, there's no utility to it. So I have to play. So here's one of the great things that you're going to do in your career is you're going to realize that, I should probably use some air, right? So I said, what if I just dial up the volume on this, to where I'm more stable? And so I just played a little louder. It wasn't like a magic thing, right? Yeah, right. Okay. Well, like I said, genius. Huh? And then you think, the next thing that happens is, a year from now, I figure, I'm struggling. Well, maybe I should just back off a little bit. So you're always doing this pendulum between essentially leaning in and leaning out a little bit, whatever that is. And if so, that's like great advice, I think. If you're struggling playing with your playing, the first, like, you have a little checklist, like like they said in the Air Force, like the engine's on fire. Let's go down the checklist to see what we should. Shut the engine off. Shut the fuel off to the end. So like a lot of times they say the air is like it's kind of a fallback. It's a lazy way of teaching because everything isn't air, except for when it is. So, but if you're like spending all your time thinking about air, you're in the wrong place. You need to be thinking about music. So, but it's like if things are not going well, the first two things you try is like, number one, try using air. It's free. Yeah. And then number two, try backing off a little bit. I mean, that takes care of a lot of different things. So in any case, my point being is that when I got into that, so I'm just going to lean in a little bit. I'm going to put a little bit more body into the sound and get a little bit more core to it because I'm playing too lightly for the last 3 years. All of a sudden, my tempos, like I broke through a plateau with my tempos, and my fingers started moving more. So it was a really interesting moment because after about the first day you're thinking you're just having a good day, and then if it's like 3 or 4 days, and then you're like, okay, this is there's a correlation here to the way that I'm interacting with the horn, and so I'm trying to observe these things. The idea is to have a sort of an autopsy or a post-mortem of all of this, and to say these are the things that I got from it. I'm not really worried about what they are. I'm not going in with specific goals other than to make it mentally and physically easy. And what I mean that when I was talking about, like, I realized when I was playing in those harder keys, unfamiliar keys, that I had to concentrate really hard, or think about the chord changes, or think about whatever. And it's like I'm at the point where I just don't remember what key I'm even in. I'm just playing the tune.
It's just there.
I start there. Sometimes I'll change keys in the middle and not realize it. Not on purpose. It's just like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be in D and I'm like an A flat now. I don't know how that happened, So it's like I probably should pay a little bit more attention, than that.
Happy accidents.
Yeah.
Bob Rose, right?
Yeah. But I mean, the idea behind it is just do a deep dive on something.
Yeah.
Learn one tune. Like a lot of times what they say, you need to know these 50 tunes and you need to know all your scales and the amount of information. It's the opposite of what I was talking about when we first started talking about, I'm growing up, I didn't have any information. Yeah. So when I got it, it was like gold. Even if it was bad information, it was something. Yeah. Now it's the opposite of that, and you're trying to tunnel through it and figure out what's the critical information that I need to do this stuff. And so that's where we're, all of these things have to support what I'm trying to do. And like its ease is not physical. I mean, part of it is, and part of it's mental. And so what you're doing is you're changing. Something you do is easy. If it's an event, it's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely fascinating. You think that's the runner in you that just wants to torture yourself? Well,
I love to run. I mean, I told you I got a bum knee from a couple of weeks ago, so I'm like hobbling around they think I'm like Igor from Young Frankenstein. I'm like walking around the conference, like, I'll be right there. Hang on a second. I did figure out how to challenge myself from running, because when I ran as a child or as a teenager, I got really good at it. But I didn't have any competition. So I figured out the clock is what your competition is. So you're competing with yourselves. Yeah. So that part I learned early, and it made sense to me that you're ultimately that's the correlation. It's like, what are you really trying to do? You're trying to compete with yesterday's version of you,
yourself,
whatever like that, and not in a bad way. It's just like, hey, see if I can get a little bit better today, or do something a little bit more interesting. But what I was saying is, like, the Donna Lee project, it's narrowing the things that I'm doing, but it's a type of way of practicing that incorporates all of the things that you're talking about. We break them down. Articulate. I had a student send me, I need to work on articulation. Everything's an articulation study. I need to work on this. All of those things are in Donna Lee if I choose to make it a range study, a low register study, a speed study, a transposition study, an articulation study, a theoretical study. All of those things are there if I want it to be, if I want to concentrate on it. I don't have to go looking for other things. I'm looking at ways of that, and when you think of it that way, what you're doing is and I don't like the word efficiency because it's a factory term. I hate that. Yeah. It's something that's inhuman. What we do has to be an artist means to waste time. and you have to. And so I don't want to waste time, but I don't want to feel like I'm punching a clock in a factory to do this. So I don't like to use the word efficiency, but I can do things that help me globally that are more efficient, though. That's the word for it when we say it. So instead of breaking things down, and it's more interesting that way.
Absolutely fascinating. You said we weren't going to have anything to talk about. We could go on for 4 hours and still not scratch the surface.
I'm working on being interesting only to myself because I've not as much success with other people.
I'm so excited to have you on. But I know
it's a lot of fun.
There's a lot to do here. So how can folks find out about you? Website, social media? I know you post videos a lot.
I'm on social media on Facebook. Just my name, Scott Belck, and then I have a website, scottbelck.com. And I've got a blog which I have to get reactivated, but it's trumpetshed.com, trumpetshed. And I teach at the University of Cincinnati. So, we have undergraduate, graduate programs. So if there's anybody looking at that, like I said, if you're out of state, look at grad school. But it's Cincinnati's a beautiful town. We love being there. And I love that school. And we have a really cool department and, really good students and a culture of improvisation that's pretty healthy and cool. I really love doing it and being around the folks that I work with.
And you're there.
I'm actually there.
You're there.
Well, not right now.
Well, you were there at 5 o'clock on Friday to get that call from the Walt Disney World musician.
Cool.
So that proved you were there. Absolute honor to have you on, Scott.
A lot of fun, John.
As you know, it's coming. If you could leave our listeners with one last piece of advice that you would consider your best piece of advice, what would that be?
Try to have some fun with this stuff. It's supposed to be. I went into it because it's fun. You should go. Don't take what you do seriously because it's worth it. It's valuable. It's art. It's music. Do it well, but don't take yourself seriously. Have a sense of humor about what you do. Cut yourself some slack. It takes a long time to do this, and be patient. I tell my students I have one superpower. I'm patient. That's what allows me to do a lot of the stuff that I do. Just be patient. Yeah.
Great advice, Scott.
Thanks,
Thank you
John.
so much.
All right, cool, man. Yeah.
Well, Scott is an absolute treasure in our industry. As you can tell from the interview, amazing professor and administrator at his university, amazing trumpet player, super nice guy, and just a devil of an author with his lip slurs. You can learn more about Scott at scottbelck.com. We'll have the links to his website, also his social media. He's pretty prolific on Instagram and other social media. You definitely want to follow him because, he's got a great sense of humor. He's an amazing trumpet player, and the stuff he does is very inspiring. If you ever think about, you're in the... So we'll make sure we have links to his website and to all of his social media down below in the description to this video and podcast, and also on the show notes for this episode. Make sure you follow him. If you're ever having a hard day practicing or you're, digging in deep and just really frustrated, remember that somewhere out there, Scott Belck is going through Donna Lee in every key. So whatever you're doing, he's probably doing something even more torturous. But again, a lot of great examples, both for the trumpet players, brass players out there, and also for those educators out there in this interview. And we hope to have Scott on again. Huge thank you to Scott for spending some of his time at ITG, the conference a few months ago, and look forward to seeing him in the next one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. 5-star reviews, hit the subscribe button, all the things. I have to ask every time because if I don't, then the bosses get mad at me. Truly, though, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening and watching this podcast. It means a lot to us here at the shop. I hope wherever you are in the world, you are happy and safe and maybe practicing a little bit. That's what I'm about ready to go do. So until next time, let's go out and make some music.